it has never been such a stark divide.
Right.
And I feel like, to your point, Bill, the socioeconomic disparities are a lot, and class resentment is a lot and anti-intellectualism and elitism is what is driving many of these anti-establishment, which are Trump voters or
Right.
anti-establishment
Absolutely.
voters.
MAGA snowflakes completely lost their mind because Katie Couric had the gall to try to understand Trump supporters. Now, they're going to tell you that she was calling the whole conservative movement stupid, but they would be lying to you. So let's take a step back, let's rewind the tape a little bit, and let's get some context as to what she was actually trying to say.
But I'm talking about overall income inequality and even taking race out of it. The huge chasm between the uber wealthy and
Yes.
people who don't have $400 in an emergency.
Ridiculous.
It has never been such a stark divide.
Right.
And I feel like, to your point, Bill, the socioeconomic disparities are a lot, and class resentment is a lot and anti-intellectualism and elitism is what is driving many of these anti-establishment, which are Trump voters or
Right.
anti-establishment
Absolutely.
voters. So I think that is a huge problem that we have to address. I mean, globalization and, the transition from an industrial to a technological society. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been jealous of what someone else has or resentful. It is such a corroding and bitter, almost bile feeling.
Right.
And I think that when people who are really struggling see people who have everything and are on top of that looking down on them, it is just a recipe for such anger and resentment.
So what is she actually trying to say here? Is she calling all Trump supporters stupid? I don't think so. I think she's trying to take a step back, and she's trying to understand why the conservative movement has attached itself to things like populism and people like Donald Trump. And what do we constantly hear from conservatives? They're mad that the manufacturing jobs went away and never came back because of globalization. Maybe they feel left behind because of all the new technology that is required to know to be in the workforce these days. Overall, I think they feel like they're not getting their piece of the American pie. And that sucks. And Katie Couric is rightly diagnosing the issue and saying, hey, we need to address this. We need to come up with solutions. So what's wrong with that? But the MAGA snowflakes, they're just going to glom on to the anti-intellectualism comment and play the victim, because that's what MAGA does these days. But if we take a cold, hard look at the MAGA movement, we all know that anti-intellectualism is part of their brand. And we know that because of things like COVID, things like climate change, attacking the education department. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this anti-intellectualism affects or pervades through the current MAGA movement.
One of the things that really stands out is the partisan divide in who's getting vaccinated and not. We find that people who identify as Democrats are vastly more likely to be vaccinated compared to people who identify as Republicans.
61% of unvaccinated people in America today are Republican. It's now the single most reliable predictor of vaccination status. But this wasn't the case with prior vaccines. Multiple polls over the last few years showed majorities believing in the value of the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine and bipartisan uptake of the flu vaccine. The Kaiser Foundation's data hints at why this partisan divide over COVID vaccines emerged. Strong majorities of Democrats say they trust these mainstream news sources for information about COVID-19. The only source that nearly half of Republicans trusted was Fox News.
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president.
From the start of the pandemic, many of Fox's top anchors said the threat from COVID was being exaggerated to harm President Trump.
Democrats and their media cronies have decided to weaponize fear and also weaponize suffering to improve their chances against Trump in November.
They're scaring the living hell out of people, and I see it again as like, oh, let's bludgeon Trump with this new hoax.
People who have chosen not to get the vaccine most of them say they're not at all worried about getting sick from COVID. A majority of them believe that the news media is exaggerating the seriousness of the pandemic.
And when the vaccines were developed, Fox gave primetime coverage to the baseless claims that they didn't work and were, in fact, harming people.
The mRNA COVID vaccines need to be withdrawn from the market now. No one should get them. No one should get boosted. No one should get double boosted. They are a dangerous and ineffective product at this point.
So what would we call this besides anti-intellectualism? Republicans were literally dying at higher rates because they refused to get vaccinated for COVID-19. Even though we had study after study proving that these vaccines were safe and effective. These people seem to have a fundamental distrust of science, experts, and the educated elite. Now, I'm not saying that all Republicans hold this view, because that's definitely not the case. But it is a huge contingent of the MAGA base. And it doesn't only apply to things like COVID vaccines. Climate change deniers have been part of the conservative movement for decades now.
And so we see in the 2000s and 2010s, the Republican Party becoming more aggressively anti-scientific.
Is global warming a fact, and is it human activity that is causing global warming?
Well, those are the two key questions. I think there's an emerging consensus that we do have global warming. I mean, you can look at the data in that, and I think clearly we're in a period of warming where there does not appear to be a consensus, or where it begins to break down is the extent to which that's part of a normal cycle versus the extent to which it's caused by man.
As the Republican Party dug in, the Obama administration cemented climate change as a key part of its legacy, signing the U.S. into the global Paris Climate Agreement.
I believe this moment can be a turning point for the world.
That same year, Republicans sending a very different message.
We keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record. I asked the chair, you know what this is? It's a snowball. It's very, very cold out.
When former President Trump was elected, he made a point to undo Obama-era climate policies.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
Even when the U.S. released a major climate report in 2018, Trump cast doubt on its findings, and a subsequent push for action led to more gridlock.
This is such a major watershed moment.
This is a government power grab.
So there may have been some climate change predictions that were wildly incorrect. I think we could all admit that. And that doesn't really surprise me, considering humans have never been good at predicting anything. But that doesn't mean we should discount the 90+% of scientists that say man-made climate change is a very real issue. Again, it comes back to this inherent distrust of anyone with expertise. This is what we call anti-intellectualism. So was Katie Couric calling all MAGA supporters stupid? No. Would I have used different language than she did? Maybe. But to her credit, I think she accurately identified a strain of anti-intellectualism within the conservative movement. But the more important point she was trying to make is that the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots is a very big problem. And we should try to find solutions to that problem and lift all Americans up. And I think if the MAGA snowflakes were honest with themselves, they would agree too. So that's going to do it for me on this one, folks. If you guys got anything out of this video, Feel free to smash that like button and hit subscribe. Maybe share it with a friend or two. If you think I got something wrong, or if you disagree with me on something, feel free to drop a comment below. And if you want to see how MAGA snowflakes used the Key Bridge collapse to spin wild conspiracies, watch that video on the screen now. I'll see you on the next one.